Welcome to What's the Difference, where we ask the tough questions about the practice of diversity and inclusion in our organizations. Why do we seem to keep spinning our wheels without seeing the progress we would like? Why are we so polarized about diversity? And what opportunities exist to have your company take advantage of what a truly diverse and inclusive company can do? Here is your host, Sara Taylor.
I am so lucky to have Lisa Fain with me today. She comes with such wonderful background, both internal in organizations as a practitioner, as well as external serving organizations. She and I met actually when she was working with, some folks may remember, may know of Redbox. Coinstar is the parent company. So Lisa was formerly there. And she and I worked together when she was there. But she now is the CEO for the Center for Mentoring Excellence. And so very much an expert at that intersection of doing this diversity and inclusion, cultural competence work, and mentoring. A wonderful niche that I know many of us can learn from her. So she also, of course, has, well, not of course, let's just mention it. She's got a passion for diversity and inclusion work, and that really fuels her day-to-day and her desire to create a better workplace and drive for better business results. She has conducted mentoring training programs for all kinds of sectors, corporate, government, educational institutions. And as I said, we have so much to learn from her with that intersection of cultural competence and mentoring. So Lisa, thank you for being a guest today. It's so good to have you.
Thanks, Sara. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yes. So let's just start first with you and how you came to this work. I mean, I gave a little bit of your bio, but why this? How did you get here?
Yeah, it's been an interesting thread and development for me. I actually started my professional career as an attorney. And I was a management side employment lawyer. So I was working at a large law firm in Chicago where I lived at the time, helping companies really make fair and equitable employment practices. I was doing litigation, I was doing counseling, and I loved the counseling of clients. I just really, really enjoyed that. And I learned as I started to have children that the law firm life was not going to really be conducive to being around my family in the way that I wanted to. And so I decided to move in-house to what was then just Redbox, and really to help them build a base of employment practices, right? Policies and things like that as they were really growing. They later got acquired by Coinstar, and I took on that role for the whole enterprise and realized rather quickly that this was a company that was really serving people at all levels of the socioeconomic spectrum, around, all across the racial, gender, ethnicity spectrum. And we didn't really have that same representation in the organization. And so when I was so fortunate to have a boss at the time who, when I suggested that we look at becoming a more diverse and inclusive organization, he had said to me, and Sara, this field has changed so much.
Yes.
So this was in 2009 when diversity and inclusion for smaller companies wasn't really a function in and of itself.
Yeah, that's right.
And so I had sort of suggested it. And he said, okay, why don't you just look into that? And I said, I have a full-time job being employment counsel, but I have a passion for it. I think that was really nascent from all of the things I had been interested in from a social justice perspective and a fairness and equity perspective, and just living as sort of a citizen of the world and recognizing the value that difference brings. And so I began to dive in and worked with our chief human resources officer to fill a job description. Never really beginning to walk into that role. And then one day really had an epiphany that I wanted to do it. I believed in the organization. I believed in diversity and inclusion, and asked the Chief Human Resources Officer to take a chance on me. I didn't have the
That's
D&I
great.
experience. I certainly
Mm-hmm.
had the HR knowledge, and I had the perspective of why D&I is important from a liability perspective. But as you and I know, it's so much more than that, right?
Yes.
And so she took a chance on me, and I have to say I was so hungry for the learning, and I researched and I learned and I talked to people and I hired experts like yourself to help guide me, and was really proud to have established a network of business resource groups, to have established leadership behaviors, a D&I council and steering committee that really made some changes. And one day, our women's group had wanted a mentoring program. And as it happened, my mother is a long history in the mentoring field and is really an expert on mentoring, having written 4 books. And, you know, for those of you listeners who, you know, are daughters of mothers, know that you sometimes see your mother in a maternal capacity, but not necessarily in a professional capacity.
Yeah.
I was speaking to her on the phone one day and telling her what we were working on. And she said, well, why don't you bring me in to do it? And I said, I can't exactly justify in my P&L that I brought my mommy in to do a training.
Right.
And she said, let me do it for you. Let me just do it for you. So she came in and
so she did it for free.
For free, because we didn't want to have any conflicts of interest.
Yeah.
I'm sitting in this training that she's doing for our women's group, and I'm looking down and taking notes furiously. And I had this moment where I thought, wow, this woman really knows what she's talking about. It was a disconnect that it was my mother. And I looked up and recognized, wow, this mentoring can really have an impact. Yes. Having one-on-one relationships, to me, was the missing piece in a lot of this D&I work of creating relationships across difference, really creating that connection. And as my career evolved and, you know, I was looking for a change, and a company went private and all of those things, it was time to really bring my passion and expertise in diversity and inclusion and building community together with her expertise in mentoring. And so I joined the Center for Mentoring Excellence in 2015, 2016. And now I'm really loving taking this passion for difference and applying it in the mentoring context and helping people establish mentoring relationships across difference and really build those bridges.
I love that story. And I love the, both on the personal level. Wait a second, that's my mom who's an expert. Yes. And how fabulous is that? But from the work side, that recognition also of what mentoring can bring and how that can do something that other areas may not be able to. And some folks may know a number of years ago, gosh, I don't even know how many, you may know this off the top of your head, Lisa, but a number of years ago where some studies came out that said, diversity training, none of it works. Nothing in diversity and inclusion work. The only thing that works is mentoring. Now, you know, as somebody who provides diversity training, I tend to argue against that. But I think the message there, though, is what can we learn from mentoring? What can we do in mentoring that we can't do in the other areas of diversity and inclusion programming? Yeah. Just like the overall that we preach in diversity and inclusion, you need a variety of perspectives. That's true. And a variety of approaches. That's true also in how we approach diversity and inclusion work. So it's not just mentoring. It's not just training. It's not just recruitment. It's all of those things. But obviously, since we are so very fortunate to have an expert in mentoring, we want to really drill into that. So why don't we chat a bit first? I'm curious what you think, Lisa. What are some of the things that you think you can accomplish? And you talked about it a bit, but what are some of the things you think you can really do more with mentoring to reach diversity and inclusion goals, more than what you can do in any other, say in diversity training, as an example?
Yeah. I'm listening so closely to what you said. I am familiar with that research, and I actually think it's a both and. So the
Mhm.
diversity and inclusion programming and not just programming, but work, right, which is really more than
Mhm.
programming. It's really linking into leadership and linking into culture is so important on the the macro level in an organization, because what it does
Mhm.
is it sets the framework for why it's important, and if it's done well, is really linking in with the purpose of the organization. What mentoring does is it takes that and it really makes it personal. And there are people who will think, no matter how hard we try as diversity and inclusion practitioners to say otherwise, there are people who will think that diversity and inclusion is about other people and not.
Yes.
But and there's lots of solutions for that in terms of learnings and trainings and um, uh, work with leadership and those kind of things.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think what can be really effective about is mentoring is several things. Mentoring is a leadership competency, which helps people relate and develop and take
Yeah, that's right.
responsibility
Yeah.
for development and succession and all of those things. So it really can help develop leadership competency on an individual level in a way that links into D&I efforts by making the workplace more inclusive.
Mhm.
It also um, uh, helps develop individual relationships. And in that way,
Yeah.
in cultural competency work, and I know you know this, we talk a lot about having to practice the skill and flex the muscle of cultural competency. That
Yes.
really happens only in exposure to difference.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and in individual relationships, both partners to the mentoring relationship have exposure to difference. And they have
Mhm.
to learn, in order to have an effective mentoring relationship, how to bridge that difference and
Mhm.
how to, what you and I call lower the waterline, meaning get to know each other better, how they work, how they tick,
Yeah.
how they show up because of who they are, not despite who they are,
Yeah, that's right.
and then relate across those differences.
And that's true even if that mentor of mine looks just like me. That
Oh, no question.
there is still there is an interaction across difference, and I'm not
Hmm.
going to be able to get as much from my mentor if I don't recognize that, because I don't know how my filters are getting in the way in this particular interaction. Yeah, I
Beautiful. That's so right. And I think what happens is mentoring exposes people by necessity to witness that people filter things differently.
yeah.
And whether it's motivation, whether it's values, whether it's generational difference, the visible things, the traditional primary elements of identity, and those secondary and tertiary and beyond, right? And so if you look like me and we have a mentoring relationship, you may think differently because of your training or who knows what else, right? And
Yes.
so if I say, okay, why is Sara, why might my path not be the right path for Sara? So as your mentor,
Mhm.
it's not this sort of idea of the sage on the stage, which is what we used to think of for mentoring, right? In my
Yes.
day, we used to do it this way, and here's how I think you should do it. The mentor is really a guide on the side, which is somebody who
I
facilitates
like
learning.
that. Hmm.
And in that way, I really need to understand how you learn.
Yeah,
What
that's right.
what is going to motivate you to go to that next level? And all of those things are influenced by your filters and mine.
Yeah, because your job is to guide me and who I am and how I see the world, not just to give me the advice you wish you would have had that would have
That's
worked for
exactly
you.
right.
Yeah, I
That is
love
exactly right.
that. I
And
love that. So that say that again: sage on the stage versus a guide on the side.
yeah, a sage
I
on the
love
stage
that.
versus a guy on the side. Yeah.
I
So one
love
of the
that.
one of the analogies I use a lot, or the examples that I use a lot in training is, we've done facilitator training where we help people inside organizations train future mentors within the organization. And we were training a future mentor, and she kind of took the material and went to present it. And it was this concept of going from sage on the stage and guide on the side. And I
Mhm.
don't know if you remember, Sara, that in the 1980s, there was a Tootsie Pop commercial.
Oh,
And there was a young boy who goes up to the wise old owl and
yes.
holds out the lollipop and says, "Tell me how many licks does it take to get to the center of a Tootsie Pop?" You remember
Yes, I
that
do
commercial?
remember. Yes.
Yeah. So this woman who was becoming certified to train in our methodology at her organization came and said, "It's not that model of bringing the lollipop to the wise old owl and having the wise old owl, tell you how many licks. It's more of having the wise old owl ask you how many licks do you think, and how finding how, letting you lick it yourself to really have that discovery and figuring out, do you even want to be licking the lollipop at all to get to that important to you?"
And
Right?
by the way,
And so
guess what? I hate Tootsie Rolls. So where do we even go
oh,
from there, right? Yeah.
that's exactly right. Right. Maybe it's how many chews on a Twizzler or whatever the
Right,
metaphor
right.
is. But
Exactly.
I really liked that example, and I thought that was really it was sort of a cute way to remember.
So if I love that too. And if we follow that, now the way that we've always talked about it at Deep Sea, and again, we're not mentoring experts, we're cultural competence experts. So I'm really curious to hear how you talk about this, and if there's different language. We kind of use the language of co-mentoring particularly when organizations are saying, they kind of come with, oh, we've got this great talent, and particularly from underrepresented groups, most likely people of color, women. And so we want them to be mentored so that they can reach higher levels in the organization. And it is kind of that sense of, because they need to be fixed almost. And of course that's an extreme. In some cases it's, they need to learn, they need to take in. And we've always talked about it as co-mentoring, that it is just as, if not even more, important that that leader that might be more isolated, that might not have any understanding of the experiences of folks that are marginalized in the organization, that they also have an ability to learn in that relationship. And so therefore set up a mentoring that is a mentoring for that back and forth. And it is never meant to be just top down. So I'm curious, I mean, what's the lingo and the kind of theory around all of that from your mentoring perspective? Because that's more from our cultural competence perspective.
Yeah, I love the way you're looking at that, Sarah. I mean, a lot of people use the term reverse mentoring, and I'm not a huge fan of
Mhm.
reverse mentoring because to me that implies that one would expect that the mentee wouldn't have something to teach as the mentor, something to give as the mentor.
Yeah.
I love the term co-mentoring. Some people call it mutual mentoring. I haven't found one really that um, uh, scratches the itch for the definition that I need. So I'm gonna chew on co-mentoring. But I think your point is a very, very good one. A lot of people are coming into or a lot of organizations are coming to us and saying, we want um, to use mentoring as a tool for our leaders, who would traditionally be the mentors, to learn more about diversity and inclusion. They don't use the words to become more culturally competent, but that's
Yeah.
what they
Yeah.
mean,
Right.
right? To be able to bridge across difference, and they recognize the importance of individual relationships.
Mhm.
And I will say this, all effective mentoring is co-mentoring. If
Yeah.
mentoring is done right, it is co-mentoring,
Yeah.
because mentors tell us over and over and over again how much they gain in perspective,
Yeah.
in knowledge, empathy, um, uh, strategic ability to think strategically and differently
Yeah.
by mentoring when they follow a structured um, a structured mentoring in a way that really invites them to build trust first, which is something that we talk a lot about. And regardless of what you call it, whether you call it co-mentoring, reverse mentoring, or just a traditional mentoring program, if the aim is to increase inclusion within an organization, then I really believe, and what we see is that it's very effective when that is called out,
Yes.
because
Yes.
then
Yes.
you can measure it, right? You
Mm.
can measure it qualitatively or quantitatively, or I should say, and or qualitatively and or quantitatively. You can do it both as well. But it adds a lot. And by the way, I mean, that means, that means a cross difference, but it is also important to say, we want to see more representation of women, people of color, LGBT, and to recruit a mentee class or cohort, if you will, with those characteristics. That's important as well.
Yeah, and to be
because you
okay
can start
with that, right? Be okay with saying, yes, we need that in the organization. I love that call out, and I'm thinking you probably have to do that call out even before, because yes, I'm sure it's a given that mentors at the end of a process say, yeah, I got so much, but I would guess also that that's a surprise to them, that well, I expected to teach, guide, develop, but I got so much, so it's a surprise. I think the other piece is that the importance of calling that out even before they start the relationship, that this is about you learning too. That other piece of kind of taking the onus off. And again, this is me talking. I'm not the mentor expert, so this is really more of a question for you. I would think that a lot of times too, mentors going in feel kind of a heavy responsibility. Like, okay, yeah, I know I've learned some things. I know I can share some things, but there's more of a responsibility than on them to teach and develop and guide versus to also learn and be developed and be guided. So that not only at the end, what do they say, but can you tell them in the beginning that this is what we expect?
Yeah, it's interesting. The skill is the same for effective mentoring, whether it's mentoring with a focus on diversity and inclusion or mentoring without a focus on diversity and inclusion.
Interesting, yeah.
And but the learning, if you are deliberate about the learning about difference, that's really, really essential. What I tell mentors, and you're exactly right, that a lot of times it feels like a burden to them. But the thing that people don't necessarily understand, when you think about a mentor as a guide on the side rather than a sage on the stage, in some ways that's very freeing for mentors because they don't have to have the answers.
Yeah, right.
They have to have
Well, and especially, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but just that piece of, again, when we're talking about diversity, so if you take who's your typical leader? A white male. And if we're saying, hey, we want to advance more women and people of color, so you have in the most extreme difference, you've got a white male mentoring a woman of color. I would guess that white male even more so then thinks, oh my gosh, I don't know. And would be even more cautious about that relationship.
Yeah, which really speaks to the importance of spending time building trust.
That's so funny. I just have to say, I'm just laughing because throughout this whole conversation, I keep thinking, okay, trust. We got to talk about trust. We got to talk about trust.
Yeah.
So,
well, I would love to talk about trust. Yeah, because it's so interesting. We talk to mentoring partners throughout the course of their mentoring relationship, and we talk to them usually separately and sort of coach them through, how are they doing and help them get on track and make sure they're making the most of their mentoring relationship, and, as well as kind of gathering data for our clients and so forth. But when we talk to them, as sort of at the 3-month mark, a lot of them are, some of them rush right to getting to goals. So the one thing I didn't say, Sarah, that I think is really, really important is effective mentoring is always goal focused on the goals and the development of the mentee.
Yes.
Usually defined goals. But, being the, the culture in most North American organizations is kind of this type A efficiency of let's dig right in and get to the learning.
Right.
But the problem if you dig right in and get to the learning is you miss the trust building piece. And so when we coach our mentoring pairs at 3 months, we often make sure that they've spent the time building trust. And it doesn't concern me at all if they haven't gotten to goals yet. They should have started to have some conversations about it. But we really teach them about creating this psychological safety. We don't always call it psychological safety, but isn't that what it is?
Yeah, exactly. That's it exactly.
For both of them. So the mentor needs to have an environment where he or she or they can feel like they can be authentic and vulnerable and share their own challenges in a way that's helpful to the mentee. And the mentee, of course, needs to make sure that the mentor isn't mentoring an imposter, is really mentoring who the mentee is.
That's so great. Yeah.
And so that takes some time. So we teach mentors and mentees at the beginning on how to spend time building that trust and how to get comfortable with that it's not a waste of time. It's not fluff. It's essential to getting to goal development and learning and achievement.
Yeah, I was thinking about how, if you go back to, again, cultural competence, if that trust really has been authentically developed, and it isn't just a surface level, if it is an authentic trust, then very likely some cultural competence development has happened, or at least some effective interactions across difference have happened. While, yes, there are all of those other goals, gosh, if you could just get to that goal, how lucky would you be if everyone could get to just that goal, right?
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
That's so great. So I know we eventually want to get to some of your advice for folks that, may be new, maybe just either new in their careers or new to this work in general. But before we do, and kind of get there as a more of a closing question, I wonder what your thoughts are about, and I'm sorry, I didn't prep you for this question, but what do you see coming down the pike? What do you think the future for this intersectionality of cultural competence and mentoring has in store? Whether that's a prediction or whether it's a hope. What are your thoughts there?
Oh, there's
And
so
I'm really
much
putting you on the spot. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay because I got a lot of hopes, Sarah. I'm so excited. So I think where the future is certainly our organizations are much more. And so as mentoring evolves in response to our North American organizations being more global, both from a workforce and from a customer base. I hope and I predict that there will be much more of an emphasis on making the world smaller by cross geographic mentoring. We're seeing that more and more in our client bases as well. Using mentoring as a way to make large organizations that are global much more unified, to create that sort of sense of community and unity. I think that this concept that you call co-mentoring, that many still call reverse mentoring, and for which I don't yet have a name, is really the wave of where things are going, both generationally, but there's a lot of organizations still that have heavily baby boomer population that are aging out, and we really need to make sure that our younger Xers and our millennials are becoming mentors themselves, which is really, really important.
Yeah. Yes.
And being mentored into, not just into management, but really into leadership. What does that look like?
Yeah.
And the cross-generational stuff is huge because there are different motivations, different expectations and aspirations, archetypically across generations that we need to be paying very close attention to.
Yeah, very.
And finally, I think this idea of sort of non-dyadic mentoring, so dyadic mentoring meaning mentoring pairs, but there are mentoring triads and mentoring circles, peer mentoring, that kind of thing are really where mentoring is going, because organizations all have unique needs, unique cultures, that kind of thing. So we'll be seeing much more of that going on. And what I love about that is it builds on the best of what in D&I was what I loved so much about work with employee resource groups, is this idea of building community.
Yeah.
Right? So mentoring groups, mentoring circles, those kind of things will create small little micro communities that will
Yes.
become vehicles for engagement and achievement and retention, and as a really exciting support group that takes this power of almost a mastermind and brings the benefit to the organization.
That is so great. It's like I don't know how many times in our conversation where I've thought something and then you mentioned it, because that's exactly what I was thinking too. That's really in many ways what business resource groups can be, as mentoring groups to one another. The members can be mentors to one another, and that's a move away from the decades ago affinity groups where it wasn't mentoring to help each other out. It was really more kind of we got to kind of come together against the organization kind of a thing, as a support group. So we're not talking about, in that case, a support group within that affinity, but really as a way to mentor and help to develop each other. I love that. And there again, another connection to another area of diversity and inclusion work, which is so great to make that connection. Yeah.
Yeah. And what a great value that BRGs, ERGs can add to their members to offer mentoring,
Yeah.
As a way to help emphasize the importance of authenticity, showing up who you are, bringing your identity, the whole thing, and making sure that the organization really benefits from the value that diverse populations, that all of us who are part of diversity, right, which is everybody, but specifically those ERG groups can bring to the organization. The one place where I think that could fail is when it's not purposeful and deliberate. And a lot of times people will ask me, well, if a women's group is going to do a mentoring, should it all be women in the mentoring group, right?
Mm-hmm.
Should we include and that kind of thing? And there's different purposes for each. The answer is always it depends, depending on what the purpose is.
Right.
But I think the idea of creating relationships and making sure that women are included in those mentoring relationships is really, really important, and making sure that there is structure, purpose, and measurement around those mentoring programs is what's really going to be the key to success for those business resources.
That is so wonderful. Yeah, definitely. And then the other piece about that is, again, for those members, I think so often members of business resource groups are giving so much more to the organization. Yes, they get from being a part of, but how wonderful to have that almost as an attractor to be a part of a business resource group, an employee resource group, that you're going to get something out for you too. You're not just giving to the organization, but you're going to get through this mentoring as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that. So this question that I wanted to save for the end, Lisa, you're someone with a lot of experience, both in the practice of diversity and inclusion in general, and of course, very specific to mentoring. So if you've got maybe a new practitioner, someone new in their career, or at least just new to this work, I'm going to ask you to be that sage on the stage. What would be some advice you would give to them as whether it's they're starting off their career in this work, or maybe just getting some mentoring going in their organizations? What would you have to say to them?
Yeah, connect with the organization's why, right? WHY, why.
Mm-hmm.
What is important to the organization? I mean, this is true, by the way, of D&I work as well as of mentoring work. Is
Mm-hmm.
what are the values of your organization? What is the culture that they're trying to create? What is, no doubt that there's a battle for talent, right? Of getting the best and the brightest and all of that. And certainly mentoring and diversity and inclusion efforts can tie into that. But if you are linking your D&I work and your mentoring work to the why of the organization, the mission, the vision, the values,
Mm-hmm.
the operating culture, And actually more important than the current operating culture is the desired culture that they're trying to create.
Yes.
That will be a successful initiative. If you create it as a capital O other, another thing, a flavor of the day,
yes.
just a program, a check the box, yep, we offer it. Without the accountability and the measurement and the buy-in from the leaders, it's going to be dead in the water. It may have a short life, and it certainly will have some impact, but it won't have the kind of lasting impact that it can have if it's really tied into what the organization cares about.
Oh, that is so true. I love that. And that's true of diversity and inclusion work in general, right? But very specific to this of mentoring. That is such fabulous advice. I knew it would be wonderful to have you as a guest. So I am so very thankful. And I want to let folks know how they can connect with you. First of all, let me mention you will have a book coming out in a number of years. Let's just give a shout out to that, even though you're working on it now, it's not published. Let's give a little shout out to that first. Do you have a title for that book?
It's not a working title, so it's not for release yet, but I will tell you this, that my mother, who I mentioned before, whose name is Lois Zachary, and I are writing this book together. It's going to be about this intersection of cultural competency and mentoring, and something about bridging difference and how to communicate across difference. It's coming out with Barrett Kohler Publishers in January of 2020. So really, really excited about it. It's a joy and a treat to be able to write it with my mother, who has the deep expertise in mentoring, and really has studied it over years and years and years, as well as having a dissertation, a PhD in that topic. We are so excited to be offering this book, which is really going to have some concrete examples for people on how to develop cultural competency and use it as a way to learn and benefit themselves, their mentoring partner, and the organization. Super excited about it.
Love it. I got to get on that early release list.
You're on it. You're on it already. So.
Add me to it. I love it. So folks can obviously connect with you through the Center for Mentoring Excellence. I'm guessing they can find you on Twitter. Where are some areas where that folks can connect with you, Lisa? I want to make sure they can.
Thank you. So our website is centerformentoring.com, which the word for is spelled out. So centerformentoring.com. At Twitter, it's at C, like Charlie, the number 4 mentoring, C4 mentoring, and Center for Mentoring Excellence spelled out on Facebook. Those are probably the best ways. And then email is also a good way, lfain at centerformentoring.com.
And Fain, Fain, Fain.
Correct.
That is so fabulous. Yes, connect, folks. Connect with her, because not only can she teach you now, she's going to be able to keep teaching you once that book is released, and connect with her to make sure that you're advancing your diversity and inclusion work with mentoring. Lisa, thank you so very much for joining me today. It was definitely an honor.
And a pleasure for me. Sarah, thanks so much for thinking of me.
Thank you again for your time today. If you want to join the conversation or learn more, go to deepseaconsulting.com. That is deepsea, SEE, consulting.com. And please give us a rating and review on your listening platform of choice. Have a great week.